Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into something I find super fascinating. What it's like to be a highly sensitive person, an HSP, specifically within the Frum community.
It's a topic that resonates, for sure. I mean, research shows that 15 to 20% of people are HSPs, so we're talking about a sizable portion of the population.
Wow, that's a lot more than I would have guessed. It really makes you think about how sensitivity is perceived, especially in a culture that often emphasizes strength and resilience.
Mhm.
Is that something you've come across?
Oh, absolutely. It's a common misconception, unfortunately. But we have to remember, being an HSP is not a flaw or a weakness, it's a neurological trait.
Hmm. Okay, so it's not just a personality quirk. What's actually happening in the brain of an HSP that makes them different?
Basically, their nervous systems are wired to take in more information, all kinds of information from their surroundings, and then they process it much more deeply than non-HSPs do.
So it's like having all your senses turned up all the time, almost.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And that can be a real blessing in some ways, but definitely a challenge in others.
I can imagine. Now, our source material talked about some of the strengths associated with being an HSP. What
Oh,
stood out to you?
well, one of the biggest ones is empathy. HSPs can pick up on subtle cues that others might miss, facial expressions, tone of voice, that kind of thing. They just get it.
I see. So they're kind of like emotional sponges in a way.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. And because they process emotions so deeply, they often have a lot of compassion and understanding to offer, which makes them great friends, partners, you name it.
That makes a lot of sense. Our source also mentioned HSPs often have a strong connection to art, music, spirituality, that kind of thing. Is there a connection there, do you think?
Absolutely. That depth of processing, that sensitivity, it can translate into a rich inner life and a deep appreciation for beauty. HSPs are often the artists, the writers, the musicians, the deep thinkers of the world.
It's like they experience everything on a more intense level, which fuels their creativity and spirituality.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that intensity can be a beautiful thing, but it also comes with its own set of challenges, especially in a community like the Frum community.
Right. Our source highlighted three big misconceptions about HSPs that came up a lot within from circles. The first one that really stuck out to me was this idea that HSPs are fragile.
Right, which isn't true at all. It's not about being fragile. It's about being aware of your limits and needing time to process. HSPs may feel things more intensely, but that doesn't mean they're weak or incapable.
I can see how that misconception can be really damaging, though, especially for someone who's trying to fit in.
Oh, definitely. Especially in a culture that sometimes equates sensitivity with weakness. It can lead to people feeling ashamed of who they are.
What about the idea that HSPs are overreacting? Is there any truth to that?
Well, it's important to remember that their emotional responses are genuine. It's not about being dramatic, it's about experiencing things on a different level. So, yeah, it might look like overreacting to someone who doesn't understand, but for an HSP, it's very real.
It's all about perspective, isn't it? The third misconception that came up in our source was that sensitivity equals weakness. Why is that particularly harmful, especially within the Frum community, do you think?
Well, think about it. In a community that often values assertiveness and, kind of this push through it mentality, telling someone they're weak can be incredibly damaging.
Especially for young people who are still figuring things out.
Exactly. They need support and understanding, not labels that make them feel like they don't belong.
It makes you wonder how many people have been told to just toughen up when what they really needed was to be seen and accepted for who they are.
Right. And I think that's a message that's relevant for everyone, not just HSPs or people in the Frum community. We could all benefit from a little more compassion and understanding.
Couldn't agree more. Now, our source material delved into some of the specific challenges HSPs might face within the Frum community itself. One that stood out to me was navigating all those big social gatherings, which are pretty common in the Frum world, right?
Oh, for sure. Shabbat meals with extended family, weddings with hundreds of guests. It's a very social culture.
And for someone who's highly sensitive to their environment, all that stimulation can be a lot to handle, I imagine.
Definitely. It's not that HSPs don't enjoy socializing, it's just that they might need more downtime to recharge afterwards, more quiet time to process everything.
That makes sense. The source also talked about the challenge of rigid roles and expectations within the Frum community. How does that play out for HSPs?
Well, every culture has its traditions and expectations, right? And sometimes those can feel a bit restrictive, especially for people who need more flexibility or who thrive in non-traditional roles.
I'm thinking about the yeshiva system, for example. A lot of emphasis on rote learning and discipline, right?
Exactly. And that kind of environment can be challenging for an HSP child who might need a more individualized approach to learning, more freedom to explore and express themselves.
Makes you wonder if some HSP kids might be misunderstood in those traditional settings.
Oh, absolutely. They might be labeled as disruptive or inattentive when really they just learn differently.
The last challenge that really resonated with me was the potential for spiritual disconnect. How could being an HSP actually lead someone to feel less connected to their spirituality?
Well, it's not that they don't value their faith, it's more that they might need to find their own path within it. The Frum community often emphasizes external rituals and communal observance, which is beautiful. But for some HSPs, that can feel at odds with their need for a deep personal connection to something bigger than themselves.
So it's about finding that balance between the external and the internal, the communal and the personal.
Exactly. And that can be a journey, for sure.
I'm curious, from what you've seen, are there ways the Frum community can better support its HSP members? How can it create a more inclusive environment?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is simply awareness, educating people about what it means to be an HSP, debunking those myths we talked about earlier.
So like workshops or classes in shuls and schools.
Yeah, exactly. Just getting the information out there can make a huge difference.
What other strategies come to mind?
Well, empowering educators is crucial. Giving teachers the tools to recognize and support HSP students in the classroom. That might involve creating quiet spaces, trying different learning styles, or simply celebrating the unique strengths these kids bring to the table.
And outside the classroom.
Promoting open dialogue is key, I think. Creating safe spaces where HSPs and their families can share their experiences and connect with others.
Kind of like support groups or online forums.
Exactly. And then providing guidance for parents who are raising HSP children, resources tailored to their needs, practical tips and strategies, because parenting an HSP child can be beautiful, but it comes with its own unique set of joys and challenges.
I'm starting to see a theme here.
Yeah.
A lot of these strategies, they're really about putting those core Jewish values of inclusivity and empathy into practice.
Absolutely. The Torah teaches us to care for the vulnerable and to recognize the inherent worth of every individual, and that includes HSP.
I love that connection. Now, what about HSPs themselves? What are some things they can do to thrive within the Frum community?
Well, one practical thing is creating quiet spaces for themselves, a designated corner in their home, or advocating for quieter areas at shul events. Just having that space to decompress can be really helpful.
So it's about setting boundaries, even in a culture that's very communal.
Yeah, exactly. And they can also practice flexible participation. Maybe that means arriving at events a bit later or leaving a bit earlier, finding ways to engage on their own terms.
It's about finding that balance, right? Between being part of the community and taking care of your own needs.
Right. And the last thing I'd say is to focus on individualized roles. Instead of feeling pressured to conform to predefined roles, HSPs can find ways to contribute to the community that play to their strengths.
So maybe that's through art or acts of kindness or behind-the-scenes organization. There are so many ways to make a difference.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about HSPs. Their sensitivity allows them to see the world in a different way, and that can lead to incredible contributions.
It reminds me of something you said earlier about reframing sensitivity as a gift. Can you expand on that a little?
Sure. Think about the mitzvah of Haknasat Orcham, welcoming guests. HSPs, with their natural empathy, they're often incredible at making people feel welcome and comfortable.
It's like they have a sixth sense for what others need.
Yeah, kind of. And then there's Onat Devarim, avoiding hurtful speech. HSPs are often very attuned to the impact of their words, so they're less likely to say something that could cause pain.
So they're natural peacemakers, in a way.
You could say that. And I think when we create a space where HSPs can thrive, the whole community benefits from those gifts.
I completely agree. It seems like we've only just scratched the surface of this conversation, though.
Oh, for sure. There's so much more to unpack.
Welcome back, everyone. As we delve deeper into the world of HSPs, I'm thinking about how much our society seems to prioritize extroversion. Like being a go-getter is almost always seen as a positive thing.
It's true. And sometimes I think those quieter strengths, like introspection and deep feeling, they get a little lost in the shuffle.
Right, exactly. And HSPs, they embody those quieter strengths, don't they?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what are some ways those strengths, the strengths of HSPs, can actually benefit not just their own communities, but society as a whole?
Well, let's take a field like counseling or social work. Those professions require deep empathy, right? You need to be able to really step into someone else's shoes and understand their perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I imagine those same strengths would be valuable in teaching, too. Patience, understanding, those are kind of essential when you're working with kids.
Absolutely. And what about the arts? I mean, HSPs, with their rich inner lives, they often excel as artists, writers, musicians. They bring such a unique depth of feeling to their work.
It's like they see the world through a different lens, and that allows them to create things that move and inspire others.
Exactly. And in a world that often feels so divided and chaotic, I think we need those voices of empathy and creativity more than ever.
I couldn't agree more. When we think about complex challenges like, I don't know, climate change, social injustice, it's clear we need people who can build bridges, who can find solutions that work for everyone.
It's about changing our perspective, isn't it? Instead of seeing sensitivity as a weakness, we need to recognize it as a strength, as a superpower even.
Okay, I love that. It's like flipping the script. But I'm wondering, how do we help HSPs themselves see their sensitivity as a gift? Because I imagine it's easy to feel out of place in a world that often values different things.
Well, it starts with creating spaces where they feel safe and supported to be themselves. Places where their sensitivity is understood and appreciated, not dismissed or, pathologized.
So fostering a sense of belonging within their families, schools, workplaces, even online communities.
Exactly. When HSPs feel seen and accepted for who they are, then they can begin to explore how to use their sensitivity to make a difference in the world, how to channel it into their passions and their purpose.
And that can manifest in so many different ways, right? I'm thinking about HSP artists, writers, musicians, healers, activists, all these people who are using their sensitivity to create beauty, to inspire change, to make the world a more compassionate place.
Right, and it's not always about those big, grand gestures either. Sometimes the most powerful expressions of sensitivity are found in those everyday moments.
Interesting. Like what? Give me an example.
Well, offering a listening ear to a friend who's going through a tough time, or noticing when someone is feeling left out and making an effort to include them, even just taking the time to really appreciate the beauty of nature, those small acts of awareness can make a big difference.
It's about bringing that same level of sensitivity, of empathy to every interaction, no matter how small.
Yeah, exactly. And, when we do that, we create this ripple effect of kindness and understanding. It can change our own lives, and it can change the lives of those around us.
This conversation has really made me appreciate the crucial role HSPs play in our world. Their sensitivity, their ability to connect on such a deep level, it's truly a gift.
It is. And it's a gift that we need to nurture and celebrate, not just in others, but in ourselves as well. Because it's time we recognize that sensitivity is not a liability, it's a strength.
I love that. And it's a strength that can help us create a more compassionate, a more just, a more sustainable world for everyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier, the idea of channeling sensitivity into positive action.
Okay.
We've talked about different ways HSPs can make a difference in various fields. But for an HSP who's feeling overwhelmed by everything that's happening in the world right now and wants to help, what advice would you give? Like, how can they channel their sensitivity into concrete action? Where should they start?
That's a great question. And I think the first thing to remember is that even small acts of kindness and compassion, they can have a ripple effect. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the enormity of the world's problems, We don't have to solve everything at once.
So start small, but where?
Focus on what you're passionate about. What are the issues that really light a fire within you? What talents and skills can you bring to the table? Maybe it's volunteering at a local organization or writing to your elected officials about an issue you care about. It could even be just having honest conversations with your friends and family about things that matter to you.
I see. So it's about finding those small, meaningful actions that feel aligned with your values, with your strength.
Exactly. And remember, as an HSP, you have a unique capacity for empathy and understanding. You see the world through a different lens, and that perspective is so incredibly valuable. So don't underestimate the power of your voice and your actions, no matter how small they may seem.
It's like you're saying, you don't have to suppress your sensitivity to make a difference. In fact, it's the opposite.
Exactly. Embrace it, let it guide you, and trust that you have something important to contribute to the world.
This has been such an inspiring conversation.
Yeah.
I'm feeling really motivated to embrace my own sensitivity and use it to make a positive impact.
That's wonderful to hear. I hope our listeners are feeling inspired too.
Me too. But before we move on to our final part, I want to leave our listeners with one question to ponder. How can we as a society create more spaces, more opportunities for HSPs to share their gifts and make a difference? Because I think the answer to that question holds the key to a more compassionate, a more just future for all of us. Welcome back to our final part of this deep dive. It's really been eye-opening. You're exploring not just the challenges, but the incredible potential of HSPs. It's got me thinking, what would a world look like that really truly embraced sensitivity?
It's a question that makes you rethink a lot of things, huh? I mean, so many of our societal norms, they prioritize assertiveness, competition, even a certain level of like emotional detachment. What if
Mhm.
empathy and deep thinking were just as valued?
Imagine workplaces where those qualities are celebrated, not seen as like a weakness or something.
Right, and schools that really focused on the emotional well-being of children alongside all the academics, that'd be amazing.
It'd be a culture where being successful wouldn't be so narrowly defined. And I wonder, maybe HSPs are like uniquely positioned to lead this kind of shift.
I think so too. They can be the ones to show everyone that it's okay to be sensitive, to feel deeply, to approach things with empathy.
Like they're the ones who can really embody this idea of sensitivity as a superpower, not a weakness.
Exactly. Think about it. So many social movements, artistic masterpieces, even scientific discoveries, they're driven by people who felt things deeply, who dared to see the world differently.
It's true. When we embrace sensitivity, it unlocks so much potential.
hmm
But how do we actually create a world that values it?
Well, it starts with awareness, right? Like we've been talking about educating ourselves and others about what being an HSP really means, busting those myths.
So HSPs don't feel like they have to hide who they are.
Yeah. And from that foundation, they can figure out how to best use their sensitivity to contribute to the world, how to align it with their purpose.
It's like giving them permission to unleash those superpowers. And it's not just about HSPs themselves either.
Right. It's about all of us learning to embrace sensitivity in ourselves and in others, creating a culture of empathy and understanding where everyone feels seen.
What a journey this has been. We've covered so much, the unique experiences of HSPs, the challenges, but also the incredible strengths. And really, we've gotten a glimpse of how transformative a world could be if it embraced sensitivity in all its forms.
I really hope our listeners have gained a deeper understanding of HSPs, maybe the ones in their own lives,
Mm.
and that they're leaving with a sense of like wanting to cultivate a culture where sensitivity is not just accepted, but celebrated.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the world of HSPs. Remember, sensitivity is a gift. Embrace it, nurture it, let it guide you toward a more compassionate and meaningful life. Until next time, everyone.